it's time for a comparison that I think I've been most excited about. Two incredibly powerful phones, two photographic beasts with the two different approaches to photography. But this video won't be just about photos and videos, because a phone is more than just a camera. Before we start, I encourage you to subscribe this channel because it motivates me to keep going, among other things to do comparison like this. Trust me, it takes a lot of time, not just for editing, but also for preparation. So I'm grateful for every subscription and every nice word. But okay, let's not waste time, let's dive into the content. The differences are already visible in the design approach of these devices. Oppo has opted for a very conservative look. On the other hand, Vivo went with a look-at-me strategy. I'm talking about the huge camera island that catches your eye first. The camera island on the Oppo is one of the smallest among Chinese phones this year, and that's actually a plus. Both phones have fairly flat edges, and their sizes are almost identical. Personally, I don't mind the large camera island on the Vivo anymore. I would say that my finger instinctively lands under the island, providing it with support. But of course, with larger hands, it might not be the same. Both phone has an IP69 rating, so that's a plus. When it comes to the display, you can also see the differences here. Vivo's screen is slightly curved on all four sides, while Oppo's display is completely flat. Both screens are LTPO panels with up to 120 Hz refresh rate and QHD+ resolution. While watching content, I don't notice much of difference, even despite the slight curve on the Vivo. Both are very comfortable to use. Plus, both have the same screen size of 6.82 inches. Although Oppo has the advantage that if someone uses glass as screen protector, it's easier to find one for the flat Oppo screen than for the gently curved one on the Vivo. Also, the PWM dimming value on both phones is the same, which is 2160 Hz. We will see more differences when it comes to screen brightness. According to the producer, the peak brightness on the Vivo is 4500 nits, while on the Oppo it's 2500 nits, but of course that's the brightness while consuming HDR content. In my review of the Oppo Find X8 Ultra, I mentioned that the screen could be brighter, and compared to the Vivo X200 Ultra, you can actually see that Vivo's screen is a bit brighter. When switching from a bright to dark room, the automatic brightness adjustment works well in both cases, but in sunlight, where the brightness should be kept at maximum, Vivo still has a tendency to reduce the level of brightness, and you have to adjust it manually, which is very annoying. But I will return to the topic of screens when we discuss heating these phones. Biometrics are another area where there is nothing to complain about. Of course, both have the basic 2D face unlocking, but the fingerprint sensors are ultrasonic and work very fast. Their placement is also spot on both devices. This year I bought both the Oppo and the Vivo in their higher versions, that is 16GB of RAM. And both phones have also a new Snapdragon 8 Elite. In everyday use, I don't notice any slowdowns. Larger difference will be in the software, because Vivo runs on OS and Oppo on ColorOS. Of course, which Android skin you prefer depends on your personal preference. ColorOS is more pleasant for me and the animation are incredibly smooth. But both give us a lot of customization options, but we need to remember one thing. With Oppo we can't download extra themes from the Oppo store, as they are only available in countries where these Oppo phones are sold. With Vivo, there is no such restriction, but some things do cost money, but it's the big advantage of OS. Since both phones come from the Chinese distribution, we will face some limitations, such as lack of eSIM or AI features related to the Chinese assistant. I've spoken about that in my other videos on ColorOS, Oppo Find X8 Ultra and OS, so I encourage you to check them out to avoid wasting time on it here. One more thing worth mentioning is the haptics. The haptics on the Oppo are spot on, for me of course, one of the best. It's practically what we know from OnePlus 12 or 13 smartphones. The vibrations on Vivo, in my opinion, are on different level. We have two types to choose from, crisp and soft. Crisp is stronger but feels metallic. Soft is a bit better, but even at maximum settings, it's very subtle. For me, it should be a bit stronger. And now when it comes to heating these phones up, When the temperature isn't too high, both phones handle thermal performance very well in daily use. But currently, when the temperature is over 30 degrees in my place, both phones definitely start to heat up, even browsing the internet using mobile data. The temperature to which they then heat up is way over 40 degrees. I tried recording in 4K at 60 FPS with them when it was around 28, maybe 30 degrees outside, and they managed to last a solid 10 minutes. The Vivo reached 52 degrees and the Oppo 49 degrees, but I didn't really stress them out beforehand with a bunch of photos or internet browse. And another thing that has started to happen to me at higher temperatures. When the temperature reached above 30 degrees recently, one day it was over 35 degrees, after about 7 minutes of browsing the internet in such conditions, both phones started to dim the screen, even though the screen was set to maximum brightness. It was noticeable and very annoying. Keep it in mind. In 3D Mark, on the other hand, both smartphones reach similar temperatures with a maximum of 50 degrees and their stability is at similar level. Plus for not showing any overheating warnings during this 3D Mark extreme stress test. Both phones have an IR blaster to control devices at home, but the Vivo also has a walkie-talkie app that lets users communicate offline without needing mobile service or Wi-Fi. The Oppo, on the other hand, has an extra action button where a specific function can be set. And both phones have a dedicated camera button, but honestly I don't use either on them very often for one simple reason. It's not a convenient solution for me. The button on the Vivo is better placed for me and it has more functions because besides burst photos and zooming like on the Oppo, it also lets you adjust exposure and choose a specific lens. But still, it's pretty far from the bottom edge and my fingers don't really get along with it. When it comes to the producer support, from what we can find, for Vivo it should be 4 years of Android updates and 5 years of security patches. For Oppo, it should be 5 years of Android updates and 6 years of security patches, similar to the Pro model. And now let's talk about signal and call quality. Both phones get 5G, but on Oppo I actually had to go into the developer options to turn it on for my multi-SIM card, which was pretty weird. As for signal strength, at least here where I am, I don't really have major issues, but the Oppo signal seems a bit better. In places where my signal is usually pretty bad, there wasn't a noticeable difference in call quality on the Oppo. With the Vivo, signal strength really affects how the calls sound, which honestly surprised me. And now, as for the call quality itself, it's really good on both phones, but you can hear a different tone in the voice. On the Vivo, the voice sounds a bit more natural, warmer. On the Oppo, it's really clean, very clear, almost like it's slightly filtered out. And now the speakers. When I listen to different songs on both phones, the speakers on the Vivo seem louder, but in my opinion, the sound quality itself is better on the Oppo. The sound is more natural, warmer, and most importantly, wider. On the X200 Ultra, the mid-range is more prominent, which is annoying at higher volumes. The Oppo Find X8 Ultra currently doesn't support Dolby Atmos, it has aurality sound. The Vivo, however, has something called Audio Super Resolution. In terms of Bluetooth codecs, Vivo wins because besides LDAC, LHDC, aptX, aptX HD, and aptX Adaptive, which both smartphones have, Vivo also has aptX Lossless. And now the camera. To keep it short, the specifications of each lens are on the screen in front of you. Let's start with the main lens. This is another one of those comparisons where it won't be so simple, because the focal length of the X200 Ultra's main lens has changed. It complicates things a bit, but I will try to break it down. Vivo currently have several color modes to choose from: vivid, textured, natural, plus now new black and white and classic negative. In this video, all photos are taken in natural mode. On the Oppo we have a master mode, which I will get to in a moment. The 35mm on the X200 Ultra performs really well in terms of detail and dynamic range, but for me these photos are sometimes too heavily sharpened and HDR works very aggressively here. Fortunately, we can adjust several parameters, including sharpness, and these parameters can be saved permanently to take later photos that way. Photos from the Oppo are softer, and the 1-inch sensor gives a very nice natural bokeh. With default settings, sometimes in strong sunlight, it's worth playing with the exposure and setting it to -0.3 to slightly tone down the brightness of the photos. Or it's worth using the master mode, which gives photos a slightly different look. They are a bit darker, but because of that, they sometimes seem more natural. We can use both Master Auto Mode and Master Pro Mode, which more advanced users will benefit from. Of course, Vivo has also an additional humanistic street snap camera mode, so it's worth keeping that in mind. It's also worth enabling high-res photos on the Oppo, so that photos are saved at the higher resolution. Since the smartphone has different focal length, I took photos at both 35mm and 23mm, but I also took some photos at 28mm because I heard that 28mm is best focal length to use on the X200 Ultra if you want to get a bit further away. And here we have the same situation as in the comparison of the X200 Ultra to the X100 Ultra. In photos taken with the Oppo at 35mm and 28mm, we will see a loss of detail due to cropping, but it won't be as significant as when we take 23mm or 28mm from the ultra-wide angle on the X200 Ultra. Additionally, when cropping on the Oppo at both 35mm and 28mm, the natural bokeh is still present. On the Vivo, when switching to 23mm or 28mm, not only does the amount of detail decrease, but the natural blur also disappears, causing the photos to lose their previous look. It's worth considering all pros and cons here. 35mm is great for still photography, but 23mm is a more universal focal length. It's a sweet spot for example, vacation, group and landscape photos. 23mm doesn't require too much analysis because pretty much everything you want is in the frame. On the other hand, 35mm require a bit more attention because you need to spend more time analyzing the composition. The wide angle on the X200 Ultra is of course better. Additionally, on the X8 Ultra, the wide angle has been slightly downgraded in comparison to its predecessor. But the results are better than I could have expected. On the Vivo, we will of course see more detail, especially when we zoom in on these photos. But to be honest, I expected to see a much bigger difference than I actually did. And now the telephoto lenses. The Vivo has single 3.7x telephoto lens. It's a Samsung HP9 sensor, one of the best units currently available, with an additionally brighter aperture. The Oppo has two telephoto lenses, and each of them has been improved compared to its predecessor. The Vivo telephoto focus from about 15-16 centimeters, while the Oppo's 3x focuses from a distance of 10 centimeters and will be used for macro shots and close-ups. The 6x focuses from over 90 centimeters, so you have to remember that any closer shots will be a crop unless you disable automatic switching between lenses. I must admit that in good lighting conditions, both telephoto lenses on the Oppo perform quite well and can compete with the telephoto lens from Vivo, but the Vivo might still have more details. As for the zoom, up to a focal length of 230 mm, which is plus minus the equivalent of 10x on the Oppo, both phones handle it really well. It's hard to pick a winner here, but I would lean towards the Vivo. At higher zooms is more of a lottery. We know that AI plays a major role here, and the results can vary. Sometimes it's better on Vivo, sometimes on Oppo. As for macro photography, both smartphones can take macro shots using the telephoto lens. On the Oppo, we will use the 3x and the max focal length is 668 mm. For the X200 Ultra, max focal length is 460 mm. In good lighting conditions, both smartphones will achieve very good results. In worse lighting conditions, the Vivo will perform better. Especially with the Oppo, I don't recommend crossing a focal length of 300-350 mm because the photos start to look a bit artificial. It's also worth mentioning that it's much easier to achieve focus on the Oppo than on the Vivo, which makes macro photography on the Oppo more pleasant. Portrait photos from both smartphones are very good. For the Oppo, we can use 23, 47, 70 and 135 mm for portraits. For the Vivo, it's 35, 50, 85 and 135 mm. Both smartphones do a very good job of separating the subject from the background, but Vivo should work on the default blur effect in the portraits. Compared to the Oppo, this blur looks a bit artificial, but you can adjust the blur after taking the photo. Vivo has worked on skin tone and it's currently very pleasing to the eye. However, in my opinion, Oppo's portraits are still more natural, both in terms of overall colors and the skin itself. Perhaps the skin doesn't look as attractive as on the Vivo. Of course, on both smartphones, you need to disable face beautification, which is enabled by default. And even though the X200 Ultra shows more detail, the Oppo's portraits have a more artistic feel. Front camera on both smartphones is very good. Photos look great, are detailed, and the face is quite natural, but you need to disable face beautification, which is enabled by default on both phones. Then the face is less smoothed. It's hard to me to choose 100% which phone takes better photos. It's often a lottery. Night photos on both smartphones are really good. Both have an automatic night mode that works great. Here, of course, the same situation applies as in the daylight conditions. Depending on which focal length you choose, one smartphone will be better at times and the other at other times. Furthermore, there are differences in white balance in some shots. Vivo seems to handle point light sources better, resulting in lower flares and reflections in photos. A big plus for Vivo. For action shots, both smartphones have dedicated action modes that we can use for both One X and the telephoto lens. In good lighting conditions, it's great. Motion blur practically doesn't happen at all. In strong artificial light, both smartphones perform well on both telephoto and One X. We will notice a bigger difference when the artificial light is less. That's when you actually get more blurry photos. If I had to choose one phone for action shots, it would probably be the Vivo, but I think the Oppo also has nothing to be ashamed of. When it comes to video, the Vivo offers 8K 30fps recording, the Oppo doesn't have 8K, but both smartphones can record in 4K 120fps. It's worth mentioning Dolby Vision. On both smartphones we can record with it on both the front and main cameras. Drawback on the Oppo is the inability to switch from the main camera to the front camera while recording, even though there was a significant update recently and this wasn't added. However, they did add a video pro mode and a log recording mode, which the Vivo also has. On both smartphones, in log recording mode, you can even record in 4K 60fps. The Oppo also doesn't have a separate portrait video mode. The only way to force it is by pressing the depth of field icon on the left before starting recording, but then the phone switches to Full HD 30fps. The Vivo has portrait video when you can record using 4K 30fps or 24fps. "4K 60 fps on both, but now the main lens is 35mm on both." To check how it looks like when we change the focal length. So now there is a main 35mm. Now we go to wide angle. Okay, we back to One X. In the case of Oppo, there will be 1.5x, so 35mm. And now telephoto on Vivo. The first telephoto on Oppo. Second telephoto on Oppo. And the maximum zoom on Oppo is 30x. But in the case of Vivo, we have 460mm. So it's definitely a difference between these two phones. The zoom ratio is also different on Vivo, so we can't compare it one to one. We back to 35. On both. And now running. And now also 4K 60fps, but now as main lens is 23mm, like main lens on Oppo. So now we are on a One X. Now we go to wide angle. Back to One X. In case of Vivo, they're 23mm. Okay. The telephoto in Vivo. The first telephoto on Oppo. second telephoto on Oppo. Okay, be back to 1X. And black. .4K 60 FPS on a Vivo X200 Ultra and Oppo Find X8 Ultra. In terms of Vivo, we can pause, we can take photo, and we can switch to the main camera. But in terms of Oppo, we can pause, we can take photo, but we can't switch to the main camera, even though there was an update, I think, a few days ago. And now towards sun in both. And in case of Oppo, we can change little view like this. And now running. The batteries in both phones are similar in size. 6000 mAh in Vivo, 6100 mAh in the Oppo. And although the difference on paper is very small, I feel a big difference in daily use. The Oppo's battery is noticeably better, coping better with heavier loads on the device, such as taking photos or videos. In these situations, the Vivo battery can drain faster. With the Oppo, I have no worries about it lasting a full day on a single charge, even with heavy use. I was recently at the wedding for over 10 hours, constantly on mobile data, taking tons of photos, and the phone still held out with 15% battery left. With the X200 Ultra, I'm not sure. In a similar scenario, I might have needed a power bank. Both phones come from Chinese distribution, so we get the charger included. For Vivo, wired charging is 90 watt, wireless is 40 watt, while on the Oppo, wired charging is 100 watt and wireless is 50 watt. And this difference in charging speed is noticeable. The Oppo charges much faster than the Vivo. From 10% to full, I charged the Oppo in 28 minutes. Charging the Vivo from 15% took me 45 minutes with fast charging enabled. Comparisons like this are never easy, and I will be honest, they are the ones I actually enjoy the most. We are looking at two top-tier flagships here. They both offer great performance, really solid build quality, but a slightly different approach to photography. It's hard to say that one completely crushes the other in terms of camera. In many aspects, it will be the same situation as in the comparison of the X200 Ultra to the X100 Ultra. If you want a better wide angle and a 35mm focal length on the main lens, go for the Vivo. If you want a versatile set of lenses with great overall performance, then the Oppo is your pick. And honestly, camera aside, the Oppo just feels like the more polished phone overall. Things like better haptics, a completely flat screen, better speakers and faster charging just make Oppo feel more complete. But on the Vivo, on the other hand, I prefer the brighter screen. I have support for aptX lossless, which matters to me because I have headphones that use it. Access to the additional themes in the store. Oppo unfortunately doesn't offer this. We also can buy additional photography kit with a teleconverter, which might be a game changer for some people. Thanks a lot for sticking around until the end. I hope this material has helped you a little in making your decision. I can't make the choice for you, but I'm always happy to help you figure it out. Take care, and I will catch you in the next videos. Bye.